Folks, I have done something that I've not done for a little while. I've actually published something. I've written something and it's in a book. In this book, Seleukid Ideology, Creation, Reception and Response, edited by Altay Coşkun and Richard Wenghofer. Now this is, I think, a really exciting book. This is actually the first volume in a new series called Seleukid Perspectives, which is going to be run by Steiner. Altay's done a video about the series, so if you're interested in finding a little bit more about that, go and watch that. But for me, I think it's great that there is going to be a new series about the Seleukids and a dedicated space for Seleukid scholars to really explore ideas and try to develop a meaningful and impactful discourse that can shape the future of Seleukid studies, but also I think the future of the study of the Hellenistic world more generally. So my chapter in this book is called Antiochos at Daphne and Xerxes at Sardeis, a comparative perspective on the Seleukid vision of empire. It's a bit of a mouthful, that title. It's taken me 3 goes to get it right. No, that's wrong. I will learn that title. But what's the chapter about? Well, I start in the 160s with Antiochos IV, the king of the Seleukid Empire, hosting a parade at Daphne, just outside the main city of Antioch. This is a massive parade, the army's on display, the court's on display, there's townspeople involved. Now, scholars, when they've talked about it in the past, have tended to look at this through a contemporary lens, and they've compared it to Roman tributes, they've compared it to the grand procession of Ptolemy Philadelphos, the king of Egypt. And what they've shown there is that what Antiochus is doing fits into contemporary ideas about royal and imperial display. Now, I'm interested in a comparative perspective too, but what I do is shift the lens back 300 years to the reign of Xerxes, and in particular to his exit from the city of Sardeis in 480 BCE as he's on his way to invade Greece. So why do I want to do that? There's a few reasons. First of all, people are increasingly interested in the relationship between the Seleukids and the Achaemenids, because we're talking here about 2 dynasties that rule over, broadly speaking, the same territory for a similar period of time. So there's interest there in thinking about how were they able to survive so long, what techniques were they using to maintain their power and that kind of thing. But people are also, of course, interested in the relationship between the Achaemenids and the Seleukids, because the Seleukids take over territory that was once governed by the Achaemenid kings. So one question that's really important is, how far were the Seleukids inheriting or borrowing or adopting or adapting ideas and practices that were developed by the Achaemenids, and how far were they coming up with their own solutions to the problems that faced them? I think in the past people have often looked at this through an administrative lens. Now, what I'm interested in this paper is really about the ideology of the empire, and in particular how the kings who ruled these empires portrayed the idea of empire. How did they envisage the relationship between centre and periphery? How did they portray the different relationships between the various subject nations? And I think thinking about ideology rather than administration is quite useful when we're thinking about that continuity and change paradigm, because when the Macedonians under Alexander invade the Achaemenid Empire, it's almost inevitable that there be a strong degree of continuity on the administrative lens. Partly that's because the Achaemenid Empire had been working, so why change it? But it's also because the Macedonians had ruled a much smaller territory, and they really had no kind of alternative administrative model that they could turn to resolve the challenges of governing basically all of the ancient Near East. When it comes to ideology though, there actually is a very different and very well developed Macedonian Argead royal ideology. So when the Seleukids inherit all of this, after the death of Alexander, and after lots of wars and all of that kind of thing, there are actually multiple models of kingship and ideology that they can turn to. So, while we might expect continuity in the administrative sphere, there's actually maybe a little bit more room for manoeuvre in the ideological sphere, and that's something that I kind of explore in this paper and in some of my wider work. So 2 big picture things emerge from this. First of all, read the paper and see if you agree. I think I demonstrate that there are actually quite significant differences between the way that the Achaemenids represent their empire and the way the Seleukids do that. And the real point they differ on is the way they deal with identity within their empire. So for the Achaemenids, their whole kind of vision of empire is built upon this idea that the subject nations retain their pre-conquest identities. Babylonians remain Babylonian, and so on. Now, we see a little element of that in the Seleukid realm, definitely. But I also think we see this new identity emerge, this new kind of Seleukid identity, which overlays all of these earlier pre-conquest identities, and is something where people can buy into that, they can choose to buy into that, and it will bind them to the king and his family and to the court, but also to other people within the empire. So it's a new form of identity which is designed to create unity. But the big question that I end on, not to give away any spoilers, but the big question that I end on really is whether that Seleukid identity is sufficiently distinctive for it to be effective. And I think there are real limitations with how this operates in practice, and the Parade at Daphne demonstrates those limitations. So this chapter hopefully helps people think a little bit about how the Seleukids imagined their empire, envisaged their empire, and communicated those imperial ideas, but also a little bit about identity construction within the empire. Hopefully the chapter also shows the value of situating the Seleukids in their broader context, and in particular thinking about them in the longue durée and thinking about their relationship with the Achaemenids. The Seleukids don't just inherit Achaemenid ideas or adopt Achaemenid ideas, but situating Seleukid behaviour next to Achaemenid practices helps us understand what was unique and interesting and different and new and novel about the ways in which the Seleukids sought to rule their empire, and it helps us understand what was distinctively Seleukid as a form of imperial ideology. I think that comparative perspective with the Achaemenids really brings out what Seleukid ideology can be. If that sounds interesting, if that sounds like worthwhile stuff, I have written not just one chapter but several chapters about this in the book that I talked about earlier on. That book is hopefully coming soon, hopefully. Thank you to everybody and enjoy the volume.